Hello, welcome to the first video of a series I'm going to do where I'm going to be making a game engine using DirectX 11, C++, and I'll be making a universal Windows platform application. And I should say the reason I'm using DirectX 11 instead of DirectX 12 is that I'm pretty new to doing this. I did do a little bit programming using DirectX 11 C++ a few years back, but I wouldn't say I'm very familiar with it now. I'd say I'm relatively quite new, and I'm not super familiar with C++ either. I would consider myself more confident using Python, and so back to the point, DirectX 11 is, I think, supposed to be quite a bit easier than DirectX 12 from my understanding from looking around a little bit and listening to other opinions. It sort of suggested that if you're going to be using DirectX 12, you should really have a decent understanding of DirectX 11. So that's the direction I'm going to take. And I think at the same time, in terms of me learning, there's a lot more material out there, resources available to help you out compared to DirectX 12, which obviously hasn't been around as long. And the reason for making a universal Windows platform app follows a similar sort of logic. I've heard from a couple people that it's a little easier in terms of the Windows setup, and it is what I used a few years back as well. So that's a maybe slightly less of a learning curve I have to undertake, and I'm not worried about where this game goes at all, or this game engine. I don't really have any long-term plan for it beyond just me learning and showing the progress through this video series. So for me, it's more about learning DirectX as opposed to worrying too much about the fact of whether it's going to be a Windows Store app or is it going to be a desktop application. I'm not too fussed about that at this stage. So that's the plan. So in terms of what I've got so far, so I've just created a project in Visual Studio. This is Visual Studio 2017 on Windows. And if I run what I've got, it's pretty basic, as you can see. All I've got to start with is a triangle. It doesn't do anything. Nothing I do or buttons I press have any influence on it. It's just a triangle that's rendered to the screen. One thing to note is when you create a project, you actually start with a little bit more than I have here. So actually, I'll just create a new project and I'll show you. So if I create a DirectX 11 app, and that's okay, and I'm just going to run this here. And what we should see when it eventually loads is a rotating cube that sits in the middle of the screen. Cool, there you go. So you can see that's quite a bit more advanced than my triangle. So within this template, it's given you a whole bunch of files, to create this window, render this cube, rotate the cube through time. And yeah, as I said, it's quite a bit more advanced than my triangle, but what I've been doing to start with is I've been following a tutorial series online. It's called DirectXtutorial.com. It's one I used a few years back. I think the explanations are really good, and one of the first things you actually one of the first things it tells you to do in the lesson is actually to, after you've created the app, to delete a whole bunch of these preliminary files which would have given us this cube, and then it goes through and you end up writing them from scratch. And I think that's really useful in terms of understanding the code. Certainly for me, where when you're given this full template, it's maybe not written in a way that's very clear to understand at times. As I said, I'm not super familiar with C++ at this stage. And so yeah, I've gone with the tutorial and went with a project that's essentially created from scratch. So I'll just open that up again. And so the motivation of me doing this is to kind of demonstrate what the learning process is like. You get a lot of people who ask online or say that they're interested in getting into game design, and whether that be DirectX C++ or OpenGL. And the common response is that there's often a steep learning curve involved, and they suggest that you should go back, maybe like become very familiar in C++ first, and then navigate to making small 2D games, whether it's a game of Pong first, and then build your way up to 3D. And maybe it's not the correct approach to take, but I'm just going to chuck that out the window and go straight into 3D and refamiliarizing myself with C++ in one go. And the main reason for me is that motivation-wise, the idea of going back to C++ and making a calculator to start out, and then migrating to 2D and making very simple games like Pong, that just doesn't really inspire me. And what I really want is something where I'm going to be excited to turn up my computer. Sure, it's going to be a little bit harder, but it's going to be more engaging for me, I think, to make something that is quite stimulating for me, rather than, as I said, making a calculator or all sorts of smaller applications before I get to something that I actually want. Because what I really want to make is a 3D environment. That's what I think is really cool. That's where my motivation is. And I'm just going to get right into it. So I might have said this already, I don't really have a strong plan as to where I'm going to take it. I'm just going to get right in there, see what I can do, and I'll let my sort of imagination run in terms of where I take this game or game engine. And hopefully, if you're watching this and you're interested in this kind of thing, if you're interested in getting into it yourself, you'll be able to see the kind of process I've gone through. I'll talk about the challenges I faced, what's been quite difficult to understand maybe, and just show the progression of features as I go. But as I said, at this stage, we've got only a very basic triangle. It doesn't do anything, but hopefully we'll see many more features as I continue doing this. So yeah, hope to see you in future videos, and hopefully we have something more than this little triangle. Thank you.